Hi there. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Well, we finally made it. This is the final chapter of the novel. This has been a long journey through the life and times of Queen Venus, a villain with a bit of sorrow and loneliness mixed in. In this last chapter, the prophecy, the two former friends hash it out and all will be revealed. Now, let's get started. The following afternoon was bright and sunny. I was already at the meadow, drafting the proclamation for the season to end. It was late August, and school would be resuming in just 2 weeks. I had chosen an ankle-length white dress dotted with red poppies to wear that day. The season would come to an end, and we would recommence when the snow melted in March. It was a long and dormant period of time that I often regretted. I truly wanted to rule all year long, but in this country it was unmanageable. Lord Schuyler and some of his apprentice scribes were there as well, writing on notepads and omitting errors. Clever propaganda team, I smiled. A team of writers to tailor to every possible speech. I will never have to write anything ever again. A great investment, yes, Schuyler agreed. We began laughing about a television show we had watched the night before when a messenger approached. He was led in by a team of guards. He wore the livery of the Lost Forest, a green kerchief and a brown burlap cape. "What do you want?" I asked sharply. The boy bowed before me. He might have been 8 years old. He was very short, and his cobalt eyes were large and watery. He looked up at me as if he were going to cry. "A message for Her Royal Majesty the Queen," he said meekly. "From my master, Duchess Gabrielle of the Lost Forest." "Out with it," I barked. The lad was shaking nervously. "The Duchess wishes to see you one last time before she departs. She has requested your company in the forest." "Requested? I am the Queen. Subjects came to me. What was Gabrielle thinking?" I gripped my fists violently. How dare she send this little mongrel to give me that message? How dare she request that I submit to her? The little boy did not have anything to say. Instead, he seemed to cower like a frightened mouse. "Tell your master that she must come here," I said harshly. "I will not go to your forest." He nodded and darted away, faster than a rabbit escaping with its life from a fox. My fists became unclenched, and I breathed in heavily. How dare she? "It's a shame we cannot execute her," I remarked coldly. That would have been a perfect ending to this perfect tale. Another envoy arrived later in the afternoon, after the final touches of the proclamation were being added. I was reviewing it myself when the female messenger came into the throne room. She wore the same regalia as the boy, but she had a stronger attitude. She was apparently not afraid of me. "Your Majesty," she said, diving right into business. Her green eyes gave off a snake's hypnotic glare. "My master, the Duchess, has requested your presence in the forest for one final farewell." I blinked madly. "I told your little puppy friend that your so-called master would have to come to me. I will not go to her. I am the Queen." "She felt it more suitable if you came there," the messenger girl said with a straight face. The script fell from my hands, and I began to heave heavily. The girl backed up a bit. Gabrielle was trying to lure me to the forest. She was going to slay me. She intended to change the ending of the story. I suddenly smiled, thinking of a plan. "Tell your master I will be there shortly, likely within an hour," I said, calming myself. The girl bowed before me and left without another word. I picked up the script and handed it to Schuyler, who had come rushing over in alarm. "Take the script," I spat. My rage never quenched. "It looks fine. I will give the decree." I filled him in on what was happening, and my idea. Gabrielle would not succeed in her endeavor to get rid of me, with her end so near. The idea was that I would go to the forest, supposedly alone. Schuyler would follow with his soldiers and blend in until I required them. I would not allow her to catch me alone. I put on my golden crown and encircled myself in a red silk cape. I looked like a regal queen chess piece, with only my head and crown exposed. I made sure to tuck my dollar store rapier alongside my belt, away from anyone's sight. I began the steady march to the Lost Forest, unaccompanied by anyone except Devon. Gabrielle surely must think that I would not come alone, given that I was the sovereign. Devon was my strongest ally, incapable of being overwhelmed. I kept my eyes forward as we navigated the tree maze. I had not been here in ages, and my body ached for the forest. This was where I had begun, and where I had lived for many seasons. I was, however, no longer a citizen of this forest. It was fortunate enough that I could remember each passage and narrow walkway. It was not long before we came upon the deserted playground, the old capital. No one here was around, not even the guards. I gripped the rapier's hilt under my cape. "Gabrielle Sinclair," I hollered. "Your queen commands your presence. Where are you?" I could feel the company of the knights behind me, crouched in the bush. Whether the clever Duchess had figured that out too, I was not certain. They were hiding, but I knew they were there. The Duchess stepped out from the slide at the top of the circular rotunda. That had always been the Duke's area, and now that was her space. She jumped down. She wore that familiar hunter green blouse with jeans, her hair in a mess of curls like always. "Your Majesty," she gave me an over-the-top bow, like the bow of a gymnast at the circus might give you after performing a grand display. I gritted my teeth at her insubordination. "I see you are not alone." "Why would I have come here alone?" I snarled. "You are just going to attack me, assassinate me." Gabrielle brayed like a donkey. "I never thought of that. What a great idea." I growled lowly, and she laughed even more. "What do you want, then?" I bellowed fiercely. She danced back a bit, away from me. I could see she had a wooden sword at her belt, dangling. So, she had wanted a fight after all. "Come out," I shouted, setting my hands free from the cape in a theatrical fanning gesture. Dramatically, the red cape flew up into the air, and the guards emerged from the forest in a calamitous hurry. They were all carrying spears and plastic shields, outfitted with pointed hats. There might have been 15 boys and girls rushing towards me with a fearsome battle cry. "If it's a fight you want, I'll give you a fight." "I do not want to battle," Gabrielle said, a little surprised. She drew her wooden sword defensively. "I want to chat." "Sure," I smirked. "That is why you are waving that sword at me. I can still execute you. You are still a member of my kingdom. What you are doing now is treason." "Calm down," Gabrielle shrieked, throwing her sword onto the grass. I laughed and motioned for the soldiers to stand down. "I will speak with you. I see that you submit." Gabrielle gave me an anxious yet hardened glare. In her eyes I had gone too far. This was too much for her. In return, I gave her a devilish smile. "Let's go, then," I smirked. We entered the old circular compound, and a flood of memories returned. I could hear the breeze outside, the branches rasping against the dome roof. It was a sound that I remembered. In my mind, I could picture my brother, Travis, standing astutely near the entrance, his arms behind his back. Sometimes, when the Duke had gone, for a long time, we would play the tic-tac-toe game installed in the middle wall. The X's and O's were on rollers, and all you had to do was spin them. The odd time, we would just spin them endlessly and make bets on whether an X or an O would appear. "What do you want?" I turned my attention to Gabrielle. She was kneeling like a geisha, hands on her calves and staring right into my soul. I wanted to say goodbye. "You already did that at the party," I groaned. "I have been thinking about a lot of things," she said. I did not want to move. I wanted to remain here, but life is changing for me. This forest will always be my home. It speaks to me. I nodded. It was not uncommon for children of the forest to be conscious of the trees and the forest itself. They often talked to you in strange ways and gave bizarre messages. "The trees told me something that will happen to you," Gabrielle said softly, closing her eyes and thinking deeply. "Whatever do you mean?" I asked sharply. "Is that a threat? How could the forest have told you something about me?" "They speak to all of us," Gabrielle remarked, slowly opening her eyes again. "This is a sorrowful premonition, but one I felt you rightly deserve." I huffed. "So, there will be a revolution and I will be thrown down?" She nodded, and I took a seat near her. "Oh," I stammered, my heart shattering a little. I was joking." A vision of my own untimely demise filled my mind then, and my brown eyes opened in panic. Would I be thrown from the hill like Thomas, my crown ruined? "Tell me more," I gestured, suddenly intrigued. "The oaks, the birches, the pines, and the aspens have foretold of your demise," she said, her voice becoming a melodious charm. She must have used her elven powers to pry information from the trees. The Duchess would be in command of such mystic strength. Impossible, I chuckled nervously. What do they say? An unlikely mouse will conquer the lion's den, she breathed. What foolishness is this, I squawked. A mouse could never defeat the lion. I am the lion. Yes, and the mouse will come with his friends and scare you away, Gabrielle smiled dangerously. I stood up suddenly and my hands began to shake. What a foolish premonition. There was no mouse. There was only the lion that ruled the circus. You cannot trust the trees with such power, I remarked coldly. They cannot tell you this. This is a reckless lie you are spreading before you leave. Mark my words, Gabrielle replied calmly, rising. You will be overthrown. We shall see, old Duchess. I smiled, nervously. She remained where she was, staring intently at me with her large animated eyes. I studied her too. The grin on her face was making me angry. Our impasse seemed to last hours, but it was probably no more than a few minutes. Goodbye, old friend, she stated starkly. I said nothing. There was once a legend told by the children of the forest that elves used the trees to predict the passing or ascent of a monarch. The children would dance around the trees when it was windy, and the strongest of the group, usually the Duke or Duchess, would be able to interpret messages from the wind and the leaves. It was the forest speaking and giving its thoughts to the world. There was talk that King Titan's predecessor annihilated the elves in the Lost Forest for this very reason. King Nathaniel did not want his enemies to even think of prediction, regardless if the future was good or bad. It seemed unlikely to me that the foliage could have predicted mine or Thomas's ascension to the throne, for I had believed that there was no one strong enough to interpret the tree's messages at present. Now I knew there definitely was and always had been. I dismissed the amassed soldiers except for Devon, who escorted me back to Queen's Summit. I strolled ahead and made him walk a distance behind me. I was too busy thinking to allow him any closer. The trees had never spoken to me. Perhaps they only spoke to the Lost Forest royal line, and perhaps they only spoke to the elves. The regular kids would lack any magic to interact with the trees. They could not hope to understand their mangled messages. I stopped and stared across the meadow. I was on the southeastern gravel path, staring at Alex's house. In the cozy patio where we had drunk the tea, there was a solitary figure sitting in a comfy-looking armchair. I paused and squinted, hoping to broaden my gaze. It was Alex, but she had not noticed me. She was busy reading a book. She looked relaxed and at ease. I managed a small awkward smile and turned back to my course. I was the queen of this meadow, and I had to retain that. I could not allow a foolish monologue from an old tattered duchess ruin me. She was using some magic to trick me. She was trying to instill some terror and paranoia into me, as if I did not have enough of that going on already. I reached the royal city, which was unusually nearly empty. I looked over at the fork in the road. It was a four-way path that led to pretty much anywhere in the meadow. Duke William and his entourage were on their way from Cloverleaf to Sunset. I turned away sharply, just in time for Devon to catch up to me. Duke William bowed before me, as did his collection of servants, including Jessica Walker. "Beautiful day, Your Majesty," William greeted me. I nodded. He had grown tall and handsome. "It is, yes," I remarked. We had nothing more to say, nor did I have anything in mind to remark. I turned away, signaling that I did not want to speak any more. William bowed once more and left my presence with his team. On the last day of school, I sat on my throne and stared into the great wide open. I did not focus my eyes on anything in particular. I felt like a statue at the museum to be gawked at by spectators. Children were running around from time to time, gazing at trees and leaves and then looking over at the grass. A few were yelling and cheering, playing on the equipment below. It was a very hot day, so I wore shorts and a bright blue tee accented with white clouds. My hair was tied into pigtails that hung below my shoulders. I had my elbows on my knees in a crouch and a thoughtful pose. My hands were clasped and twisted before my mouth in deep thought. Devon and Charlie were playing their handheld video games under the shade of the big oak, their spears laying idle on the grass. I could hear the faint chirping of birds. I kept thinking endlessly about Gabrielle's premonition. She had packed up and gone, leaving me with a strange forewarning. I did not believe it, but it kept sticking to my mind. When she had finally moved, I had gone to her house afterwards. It was still empty. The new family had not moved in yet. For as long as I had known Gabrielle Sinclair, she had lived at 421 Everglade Crescent. It was a cul-de-sac with 4 homes, and hers was the one on the far left. It was tucked in, with the garage off to the side and not attached. An older home, one of the originals that was built before the modern ones in Everglade Park went up. It was white-paneled, with a large bay window. Gabrielle's cats, their names had been Sandy and Claus, would cuddle up on the cat tree perched in front of it. I went up to the white chain-link fence and placed my fingers through it, gripping it like I had done countless times before. To my right had been the flower garden. Gabrielle was normally on the other side, frolicking in her small yard. I looked up at the big oak tree, the one that shaded her house and kept her backyard cool. Below it, a few gnomes had been left behind. They were arranged in a fun fashion atop redwood mulch. The tree was bordered by a circular collection of hollowed cinder blocks colored red. I smiled at them, remembering their presence whenever we played in the backyard. I stood back a little, the reality of her leaving finally resting with me. Gabrielle was gone. My old best friend was gone. I wiped a tear from my eye and looked at her house one final time. It would be many years before I revisited this place. At the beginning of December, my mother asked me to go down the block and fetch the mail. It had been snowing lightly, and the bitter cold had me in an equally bitter mood. I came back with a few parcels and a stack of letters. My guess was that most were Christmas cards or small gifts from family. My parents were quite affluent in the community and had a lot of friends that would send them small parcels year-round. At Christmas, we were typically flooded with gifts from all kinds of places. At the bottom of the pile was a letter addressed to me. It was in a bizarre brown envelope made from starchy dark paper. There was no return address, just the letters GS in the top corner in crude workshop pencil. I studied the envelope carefully and with great apprehension. After staring meagerly at it for what seemed like hours, I went to my room and opened it. There was nothing inside but a stale old leaf crumbling at my very touch. It had been dried out and was incredibly brittle. It was most definitely a maple leaf. The characteristics of its pronged structure gave it away immediately. However, it had lost its red vigor and had become pale and quite brown. I thought for a moment and stared at the envelope again, puzzled. GS, I murmured quietly, my mind slowly connecting the dots. Gabrielle Sinclair. That concludes Part 3, Chapter 4, The Prophecy. Well, folks, that's the end of the novel. Next week, I will be concluding the book with the epilogue and then later, the author's note. After that, I will likely be hosting another Ask the Author segment, where you are free to send in your questions and ask about my novel, my process, or the characters. See you next time. Music for the podcast is Space Journey by Hartzman. You can find all the Chronicles of Everglade novels exclusively on Amazon, and check out my latest novel, The Train to Dranmore, which is also on Amazon. Find us on Instagram and Facebook as well, at The Everglade Chronicles. Thanks for reading, and thank you for your support. See you next time.